All right, we're continuing our look through Isaiah. We're in chapter 46 this evening, continuing our look through the book of comfort, which is what is commonly referred to chapters 40 through 55. And we are currently in what you can understand to be the Babylonian cluster, if you would. It's a cluster of chapters dealing with Babylon. And let's see what we got here. Let's review last week, though, first. I forgot to add those in there. So in verse 9 of chapter 45, why does Isaiah pick the word for an unformed, still wet piece of clay on the wheel? That's the Hebrew word komer, rather than a word for a finished pot. Any ideas? Why clay and not pot? Clay is still being formed, right? It's still in the process of being formed, because the complaint isn't coming, in Isaiah's poetic language here, the clay isn't coming from something that can see the finished result and judge it for what it is. It's coming from something that's still in the process of being formed, and it can't even perceive its own shape. It's complaining about it. And so Israel might be striving with God in this instant that he's referring to in chapter 45, which speaks of who? Who's going to deliver the captives from captivity? Cyrus, a pagan king. So man cannot even begin to perceive the whys of what God does. So question number 2, God says, woe to him that striveth with his maker in verse 9, and then says, ask me in verse 11. Is that a contradiction? Why would that not be a contradiction? Woe to him that striveth with his maker, but then he says, ask me. Mm-hmm. Arguing with them, right? To say, I know better, right? Yep. So the two are separated by posture, not content. You can ask questions and still be right in doing so. Just as we saw that Job and Habakkuk both asked hard questions, yet they did so without sinning. The sin is in the demand and the posturing as though one knows better than God than the actual question themselves. And then finally, why does it actually strengthen the case for God's existence that he is a God that hideth himself? I think we read of that, chapter 45. Let's see. I can't remember the scripture passage. I saw it. You're right. Verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel the Savior. So because, as we looked last week, because a being who could be consistently physically observed on request would necessarily be what? Material. He'd be made of material. He'd be locatable, measurable, exhausted by observation. And that's a definition of what we're getting into. Idols. We've talked about idols before, but idols are things that man fashions himself, physical items that man has fashioned out of interestingly enough, materials that God, the one true God, made himself. Remember, if you still have your handout on the absurdities of idolatry, I think that was quite a few Wednesdays ago. The ironies of idolatry. Remember that handout there? Ironies of idolatry. God's materials man's worship. Man's worshiping God's materials. And then another irony is God gets the leftovers when one is worshiping idols. The God, the little g God, gets the leftovers. Making the God depletes you, as we saw in verse 12 of chapter 44. We're going to be seeing some of that this evening as well. The God that man fashions for himself is something that depletes him, which is the exact opposite of what he wants in a deity, isn't it? You would think that's the exact opposite. Another irony was God was made in man's image rather than the other way around. When he's forming these idols himself, he carves it, as chapter 44 and verse 13 says, he carves it after the beauty of man. But we know that Genesis 1:26 goes the opposite direction. God created man in his image. Then the fifth irony was that it was the right prayer, but it was the wrong address. He says in chapter 44 and verse 17, deliver me, for thou art my God. So the prayer for deliverance, that's a correct prayer. It's just aimed at a piece of wood or a piece of metal rather than who it ought to have been aimed at. And then finally, the sixth irony, the deliverer becomes the captor. In verse 20 of chapter 44, he can't ask whether he's in the wrong in this. He's well past that. The idol owns its maker. They that make them are like unto them. So that all from that class on 44 on the ironies of idolatry. So here, the fact that our God does not reveal himself to be physical matter is the opposite of what man does with idolatry. He is a non-physical being. He is a spirit. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John 4:24. Idols are the exact opposite, and they are physical. They are tied to things that it's man's imagination, using materials that God gave him. And we talked a lot about that in chapter 44, and we'll continue it in chapter 46. Any comments or questions? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Yep. Right. The applications we made in chapter 44 bring that home too, don't they? And we're going to have some applications to idolatry today, this evening as well. So we're going to be reading the key verse here, you can say, is chapter 46 and verse 4. Even to your old age, I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. So this idea, this is the title of the lesson, if you didn't catch it, was The God Who Carries. The God who carries. Babylon's gods, we'll learn, must be carried. And any idol that man creates, either a literal idol or an idol that we might find ourselves guilty of having today, those things are things we carry. We bear the burden of those things, when it ought to be the opposite. And we ought to be going to the one true God who does carry us. So that's going to be, and it's not just for a brief while, even to your old age, I am he. So from young to old, even to poor, that's a silver, or that means silver hair, gray hair, will I carry you. A permanent situation there. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. That's actually the point of this lesson. Yeah, never saw him do a thing for him, and and yet they were fools to worship those things, worshiping the things that they made with their own hands. So the big idea is a carried God cannot carry you. Can you picture something? Just picture a parent and his child, a father and his child, and he's carrying that child. Could that child carry him at the same time he carries them? That's circular, isn't it? It's just like a snake eating its own tail, except it's more impossible, right? It's a carried God cannot carry you. If you are carrying your God is not carrying you. Does that make sense? Logical? Yeah. So the gods of Babylon, we're going to see, had to be born. They had to be carried, hauled off with beasts of burden. And the God of Israel bears his people from the womb to old age, as we just saw, as we see in our verse focus here in verse 4. So the direction of the carrying is the argument he's laying out here in chapter 46. Who's carrying who? A carried God cannot carry you. So this is part of the Babylon cluster. Just to keep this in perspective or context, we saw in chapter 44 the absurdity of idol making exposed, those 6 ironies that we went over in chapter 44. We saw that Cyrus in chapter 45 was named as God's unwitting instrument. And one of the things that Cyrus does, how does that pertain to Babylon? Who carried Israel into captivity? Who's that? Assyria. Okay? Yeah, Israel. The northern kingdom was carried by Assyria into captivity. And then we have Judah being carried into captivity by Babylon. So Babylon, it becomes the world power, takes out Assyria. And so you have Cyrus then being the one that Isaiah's prophesied of all this, by the way. He's prophesied of Babylon taking them into captivity. He's also prophesied of the next kingdom on the world stage, that being Persia. And so we talked extensively about that in chapters 44 and 45, how that God named him by name as the one that would take out Babylon and carry and return the people back to their land. So Cyrus is named as the one that is taking Babylon out. So he's not only foretold of an unlikely nation coming up, that being Babylon, that will be the world empire. He's talking about a specific man from a specific place, specific kingdom, that would become the next world power, and exactly what he would do. And we see the collapse of Babylon's patron deities in chapter 46. And that's where we're at this evening. Chapter 47 is going to be judgment pronounced on Babylon itself. And then chapter 48 is the stubbornness of Israel that makes the comfort necessary. So that's where we are in chapter 46. So the outline of this chapter is, you'll see in verses 1 through 2, how that idols are a burden. And we see 2 specific gods being mentioned in these verses, Bel and Nebo. Then verses 3 through 4 speak about how God is a contrast to that. God bears his people, and it's a lifelong thing for Israel. Verses 5 through 7 is a challenge, which we've seen this challenge before, that who is a God like unto him? And that's a rhetorical question, because the answer is what? No one. There is no God beside him. Verses 8 through 11 speak of the summoning of Israel, the summoning of God's people to stop rebelling and to return to him. Remember and return, verses 8 through 11. And then we'll see how that salvation is near. Salvation is being announced in verses 12 and 13. So 5 parts of this argument, 5 different units of this argument. I wonder if I could have somebody read verses 1 through 2 of chapter 46. All right, thank you very much. So we have 2 gods of Babylon being mentioned here, Bel and Nebo. Bel also was known by the name Marduk, which you might have heard that name before. But they are described as not being enthroned in glory here, not even bowing. They're being referred to as stooping, being loaded onto pack animals. These are the false gods of Babylon, and these are men, or not men, but gods, little g gods, in whom those men of Babylon trusted. And these are now being carried off. These beings that are imaginary beings that they put their trust in are now being carried off with them into captivity. And so we have, does that describe something you would want to worship? No, right? Not at all. So who carries who? So let's someone read for us verses 3 through 7, please. All right, so thank you very much. We've got a few mentionings of carrying, of bearing here. The gods of Babylon, the irony, another irony you can add is they cannot carry themselves. The gods of Babylon cannot even carry themselves. They have to be carried by beasts. And in this time, in the ancient world, these little g gods were believed to be the bearers and sustainers of those that worship them, the source of their strength, source of their protection, and their destiny. Repeatedly throughout the Old Testament, when you read of the gods of the Canaanites and the other people, they believed their gods protected them, right? They believed in the protection and sustaining from these false gods. And yet here, the weight flows in the wrong direction entirely. Could you imagine being a Babylonian and having to haul your idols up on this cart to move it around? Would you see the irony in it? Many didn't. We'll see, I think, in a few, the reference to 1 Samuel chapter 5, where you had the Philistine god Dagon. You remember what happened in that chapter? Let's read it. 1 Samuel chapter 5. 1 Samuel chapter 5 and verses 1 through 4. And the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. So they're bringing this before Dagon because they're like, look whose God we captured, right? So brought them into this temple of Dagon that they had there. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and they set him in his place again. When they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground beside the ark of the Lord. And the head of the Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off. Upon the threshold, only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Could you imagine being in the shoes of a worshiper of Dagon? And Dagon kept tipping over in the night and finally busted to where he was just a stump one morning. Would you believe in the power of your god Dagon after that? I'm not sure how many minds were changed, but they should have. They should have gotten the picture. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. One of Yep. Absolutely. One of the things one of the points I wanted to make in this lesson was the God that you manufacture is limited by the same limitations that you have initially, right? It can only do what you can do, and much less than what you can do actually, because who's bearing who? The beasts have to carry these gods. Coming back to chapter 46 here of Isaiah, Bel and Nebo had to be carried by those that worshiped them. They are a burden to the weary beast. Let's look at Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaded. These things were heavy. They are a burden to the weary beast. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. So just as the Philistines, they captured the ark of Israel, they placed it before their god Dagon, and by morning he had fallen on his face twice. God does not share his throne, does he? He does not share it with Dagon, doesn't share it with Bel, doesn't share it with Nebo, doesn't share it with you, doesn't share it with anything you might imagine up or form yourself as your God. He doesn't share those things. And those things will pass with the finite. They're based on finite things. They're going to pass with all the other finite things. Who carries who? Bel and Nebo had to be carried by those they worship. And just quickly, Bel, also known as Marduk, chief deity and patron god of the city of Babylon, credited with establishing cosmic order and the empire's dominance. They were credited with Babylon coming to power and being the world empire at the time. And then what do you think about Bel when Persia takes over, right? They're gonna be found out. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but you've got to move them from the workshop to where they, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, this is them being carried into Persia, basically, or relocated by the Persians because the Persians are taking over. But at the very least, they had to be moved at one point, didn't they? You had to mark on them and fashion them yourself, and move them from one place to another. It should have been clear to them who's bearing who's carrying who, even before Persia came on the scene. It's like, right. Yep, absolutely. Can't carry himself. Yep. Mine's bigger and heavier than yours, right? And then you've got Nebo. Nebo was according to Babylonian theology, if you could call it that, was the son of Marduk. And so he's the god of writing and wisdom, keeper of the tablet of destinies, and his name fills royal titles. If you notice, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebo's name is in Nebuchadnezzar's name. It means Nebo protect the crown is what his name means. There is a Akitu festival in which Marduk's statue was paraded on the soldiers of priests. So that he was moved. He was moved in the time of Babylon. So he was moved around, paraded by the priests on their shoulders. And so what Babylon called procession, God calls collapse under the weight of something that cannot save. Who carried who? Well, the priests had to carry Marduk's statue around on the Akitu festival. Let's contrast that with the one true God. Let me see here. First, before we do that, how many times do we, looking at verses 1 through 4, how many times do we see, let's count them, every instance of the word carry here, verses 1 through 4. Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth, their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaden, they are burdened to the weary beasts, they stoop, they bow down together, they could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, which are born by me, that's another form of it, from the belly, which are carried from the womb, even your old age, I am he. And even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made and I will bear, even I will carry and will deliver you. So there's at least 6 instances of carry or bear in those verses. And then we see a reversal of direction here. There's a contrast happening here. It is Bel and Nebo that are carried, but it is God who carries toward the end of these verses here. It is God who carries. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 17, someone please. But actually, before that, I want to read 53. Chapter 53 and verse 4, which we know, we're all familiar with chapter 53 as being messianic. It is speaking of our Lord. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And if we look over at Matthew chapter 8 and verse 17, the application is made there that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. So someone, 1 Peter 2:24, please. First Peter 2:24. Thank you very much. So, who's doing the bearing? It's our God that does the bearing. It's our God that does the carrying. There's a big contrast between Bel and Nebo and God. But what kind of idols do we have today? Are they always physical objects carved out of wood, engraved metal? Out of plastic? They can be. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Your whole world revolves around this. Whatever you put in front of God, whatever you put, Bel and Nebo were trusted. They were relied upon. The Babylonians felt secure with Bel and Nebo. There's security, there's trust, there's priority put in these things, placed in these imagined things, things that man organized himself. Do we still put our trust in and prioritize, find security in things other than God? What kind of things? Jobs, that's a big one. Yep, jobs, money. I've probably mentioned this more than once. My employment right now, we've gone through two, not mergers, but acquisitions that I have survived. Right? I've been reminded at least twice just how secure I am there, right? Because I've seen there's always been some layoffs, and those layoffs, when I'm looking at who those people were, so people that have been in with the company years, decades, put a lot of time into those jobs. They were good at their job. And then, guess what? It's redundancy. Well, they carried away the treasures from the temple as well, or the Babylonians. That was just something they did, where they would take away a symbol of wealth from them, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You think they would have melted it down?
Right. Yep. Yep. I do also know that back then, when a nation would conquer another, their God would absorb some of the qualities of the gods that they took over, basically. So I think that's how Bel came from Marduk. It kind of absorbed Baal, yeah, yep. But so we find security in things, and we put our priority, we put all our time in these things that are not bad things, right? But we put all our trust in them. We'll prioritize these things over God's kingdom today. And what happens? We get laid off. Not your fault, no fault of your own. Or was your job is your job something you have to work at to keep, to carry? Yeah, you've got to do a lot to carry that thing, to keep it. And then when budget cuts happen, do they return the favor? No. Your loyalty didn't matter. None of that mattered. So many things you could put your priority in. Even your earthly family, you can do that. You can prioritize and put all your focus, your priority, and your trust, your security in your earthly family. And does your earthly family ever disappoint you? Do they ever turn and leave you in a bad situation? Ever happen? These are not, it's not a bad thing. Family's not a bad thing. In fact, if you were to prioritize God, these things are going to be taken care of, aren't they? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. Right? Everything's going to be worked out. But it takes work to keep relationships, doesn't it? Everything that you prioritize over God is something that will be found to be a burden on you. And it will, when it comes down to it, we didn't get to it. Let's see. Well, we'll pick up next week. We've talked about the carrying, and we'll talk about what happens when you're in a tight spot, because Bel and Nebo aren't going to help you. God will. Thank you guys for your attention.